Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Assembly Judiciary. We'd like to welcome everyone here in Carson City as well as anyone watching online or through Nellis. With that, Secretary, please take the roll.
Assemblywoman Bilberry Axelrod. Here. Assemblywoman Cohen. Assemblywoman Considine. Assemblywoman Gallant. Here. Assemblyman Gray. Assemblywoman Hanson. Here. Assemblywoman Hardy. Here. Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch. Assemblywoman Marzola. Here. Assemblywoman Mosca. Here. Assemblywoman Newby. Here. Assemblyman Orentlicker. Here. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Present. Assemblyman Urick. Here. Chair Miller.
Here, and it looks like all members are present. With that, we have just a few reminders. Again, we will have public comment at the end of today's agenda where people from the public will have the opportunity to make a comment on anything pertaining to this committee, but not necessarily on the bills that we're going to hear today. And everyone will have up to 2 minutes for that. We also, a quick reminders that not to approach the dais, make sure you're turning in your work, any of your presentation materials by noon the day before the hearing. Of course, we ask that everyone turn off anything on turn down their electronic devices so not to disrupt anything in the meeting today. And so with that, today we have 2 hearings and not a bill introduction. We have 2 hearings today. The first one will be Assembly Bill 117, which is sponsored by Majority Leader Howdigi. It will be presented by our Majority Leader as well as Michael Dickerson from Clark County Chief Deputy District Attorney and Carrie Underwood, the Director for Las Vegas Metro Police Department Homeland Security. With that, I will open up the hearing for Assembly Bill 117 and allow the Majority Leader a few moments to get settled and ready, and then when you are ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Committee of Judiciary. I'm Assemblywoman Sandra Howdigi, and I'm joined by the Director of the Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Center, Carrie Underwood, and Clark County Chief Deputy District Attorney, Michael Dickerson, who are both with us via Zoom. And we are here to present Assembly Bill 117. Across the country, Americans have witnessed a disturbing and dramatic rise in violence linked to radical, violent hate groups that include sovereign citizens, Boogaloo, and neo-Nazi organizations, to name a few. According to a February 2023 report from the Anti-Defamation League, mass killings in the United States linked to extremism have increased threefold over the last decade. Here in Nevada, we are all too familiar with this rise in extremism. In early 2013, a Las Vegas couple linked to the sovereign citizen movement spent hundreds of hours organizing a plot to kidnap and assassinate police officers before law enforcement stopped and arrested them. Unfortunately, in June 2014, as many of us remember, another couple linked to the sovereign citizen movement successfully carried out a targeted assassination of 2 Las Vegas police officers and murdered an innocent bystander. In June 2019, a Mineral County man traveled to the Gilroy Garlic Festival, killed 3 individuals and wounded 17 others in what law enforcement discovered after the shooting was an attack linked to the violent ideology and domestic terrorism. And just in Las Vegas, hate crimes against African Americans more than doubled in 2020, even in the middle of a pandemic. The rise in anti-government and hate group violence is a threat to every community in every corner of our state. Fortunately, we have also had moments of success in deterring and thwarting domestic terrorists. In April 2020, the Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Center, in coordinated effort with the local, state, and federal officials, arrested 3 men connected to the Boogaloo movement and stopped their attempt to bomb a peaceful protest in Las Vegas. While we should be proud of this victory and the lives we saved, it was also a wake-up call that we need to plan and prepare now to be ready for a future disaster. And this is what we're doing here today. After conversations and meetings with the district attorneys, Las Vegas Metro Police, Department of Public Safety, State Police, Department of Emergency Management, Sheriffs and Chiefs Association, and citizen groups, we come to you today with Assembly Bill 117 to accomplish 2 major things. First, Section 2 of this bill organizes existing criminal laws into a new chapter of NRS designated as domestic terror activity. And with the proposed conceptual amendment, narrows our focus to target the acts and perpetrators of domestic terrorism. This is important because it allows law enforcement and prosecutors to go to a specific chapter in law in order to take on domestic terrorists instead of having them search through NRS to find something that allows them to apprehend and charge domestic terrorists. It also makes clear that stopping domestic terrorism is a public policy priority for our state. Second, this bill puts resources behind this effort by establishing the Anti-Domestic Terrorism Assistance Fund and appropriates $5 million to this fund so that agencies with programs going after domestic terrorism can seek grants to expand their mission. I also want to point you all to the conceptual amendment that was uploaded in Nellis and share a verbal change with you. During the course of the development of this bill, law enforcement agencies have committed to developing a coordinated approach to their efforts and investigations on domestic terrorism. So we are now striking Section 3 in its entirety and allowing agencies to move forward with their coordinated approach with an existing law. In addition, the conceptual amendment does a few things. One, it aligns the grant process to follow existing procedures for Homeland Security grants. Two, it strikes NRS 207.337 from the bill. And three, it allows State Police Criminal Investigative Division to provide support and resources to local law enforcement on domestic terrorism investigations. Finally, the conceptual amendment includes new language that narrows the existing law so that they focus only on domestic terrorism. Nevadans have already felt the pain inflicted on them by domestic terrorists, but with coordinated attacks we are witnessing in other parts of the country against elected officials, infrastructure, and minority communities, the pain may well only be a preview of what's coming in the future. Now is exactly the time to realize the enormous threat before us and coordinate and stop the next attack before these groups harm us, our democracy, and our way of life permanently. Assembly Bill 117 is the first step in this long-term effort. With that, Madam Chairwoman, I would like to invite my co-presenters to say a few brief words. First, I would invite the Director of the Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Center, Carrie Underwood, and then followed by Clark County Chief Deputy District Attorney Michael Dickerson, both of whom are on the front lines of the fight against domestic terrorism. If we could start with Mr. Underwood, Director Underwood.
Good morning. My name is Carrie Underwood. I am the director of the Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Center in Las Vegas. I've held this position for just over 2 years. The Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Center is a Department of Homeland Security recognized fusion center. We're one of 2 fusion centers in the state of Nevada that are recognized. We are hosted by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and we are comprised of over 20 federal, state, local, and tribal partners working together to prevent acts of terrorism and mass casualty incidents. We strive to accomplish that objective by maintaining a 24/7 situational awareness capability here in our center, by vetting and investigating reports of suspicious activity, by analyzing threat trends locally, nationally, and globally, by developing awareness training focused on behaviors indicative of mobilization to violence, by investing in relationships in our community to become more resilient, by creating training and hosting training exercises in advance of our special events. We work collaboratively with the Nevada Threat Analysis Center, the Las Vegas Joint Terrorism Task Force, with the FBI and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And we leverage our mental health and social service partners here in our community to off-ramp individuals who are mobilizing toward violence to get them to long-term stability. And I look forward to questions. Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you, Director Underwood. If we could go to Chief Deputy Dickerson next, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Michael Dickerson. I'm a Chief Deputy District Attorney in the Clark County District Attorney's Office. In that role, I've done counterterrorism work for the past 7 years. This work includes conducting investigations with the Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Center and other law enforcement partners and prosecuting criminal acts related to violent extremism. Through that, disruption of terrorist plots, prosecution of terrorist acts, and also working on off-ramping potential violent extremists from pathways of radicalization and violence. During that time, I also experienced 1 October from that same perspective as a counterterrorism prosecutor. That evening, I immediately began working the investigation with Southern Nevada counterterrorism detectives, waking up judges to secure search warrants, and all the while continuously checking on my loved ones who I knew were down there. Since that time, I've seen the rise in domestic violent extremism and anti-government violent extremism that jurisdictions across this country have experienced. Through all these experiences, I've come to know that we must continuously work to secure our state and our communities from domestic terrorism and all forms of violent extremism, because every single day matters in our effort to stop tragedy before it ever strikes again. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before we go to questions, I just wanted to explain to the committee that I'm not creating any new laws or creating any new penalties. What we've done is gone through statute, and we've taken existing law that deals with counterterrorism or domestic terrorism, and we're organizing them into one statute so that they're easier to find. So with that, Madam Chair, we are ready for questions.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that clarification. So again, no new laws, no new penalties, not even necessarily a new process or procedure. We're just combining everything into one chapter for
Correct.
reference.
Correct. We're organizing everything into one chapter so that it's clear and easy to find.
Thank you.
And creating an appropriation. So the only thing new that we're doing is creating an appropriation of $5 million. Everything else is already existing.
Okay, thank you so much for that. With that, we do have a few questions. The first question will be from Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this bill. I want to thank you for bringing this because considering some of the major economic engines of our state could be affected by this, which could hurt the state in multiple ways, so I appreciate it. But the question that I had on Section 6, there's a difference between reading it at night and reading it in the morning. I just want to point out, it does say any money remaining in the account. So this is Section 4, Sub 6, the interest and income earned on the money. I just want to confirm my second reading or third reading of this, that money remaining in the account at the end of the fiscal year does not revert to the state general fund, so it stays with this fund. Is that the case? Is there any cap on the amount that this fund could build up to? Or is the idea, because I notice on Section 3, the determination of the proposed expenditure is appropriate and necessary, there's a great amount of review before any of that money is expended, which I really appreciate. But then if it's not expended, it just sits there and it grows. And I guess boiling it all down, my question is there a limit to how much money that fund can hold at any time, or can it just endlessly grow?
That's a great question. Thank you so much, Sandra Howdige. For the record, I never thought about the fund growing from my conversations. It was always clear to me that the money would be expended in its entirety. And so my vision was always to have this $5 million in this fund and have it expended by different agencies and nonprofit organizations who are focusing on domestic terrorism. And the need seemed to be there to expend the money. So I'm willing to have those conversations if we do need to have a cap. I just never envisioned there actually being extra money left over.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Assemblyman Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Assemblywoman, for bringing this. I do believe there's, you did bring up some valid points. I think you left out a few valid points too, but there are issues. But I believe with the consolidation of all this language into one section, it does create some new meaning, and it's kind of worrisome to me, and I'll tell you. Our nation's traditions include a long history of communities preparing for their common defense. There's a longstanding right to organize locally in the defense of communities. These unorganized militias are affirmed in Title 10 U.S. Code.
Assemblyman, is there a question?
I'm getting to it, ma'am. I'm giving the backstory as a lot of us do. I'm leading up to my question. Thank you. Subsection 246. Will this interfere or negate our rights as citizens and our ability to address and organize and train for these legally recognized militia class, the unorganized militia class, which is aside from the National Guard, to prepare for our own defense in the face of emergencies, civil unrest, natural disasters? I believe that this is broad sweeping language that will absolutely interfere with that and conflict with federal law. So what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Gray. I am actually going to go to Chief Deputy Dickerson to help answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. As far as this bill is made to address issues that we see within the overall spectrum of violence targeting our communities, that be with or without ideology. So anybody that is geared towards organizing to overthrow the government, to harm our citizens and our communities. Those are the people that are going to be addressed by this bill, not folks that are exercising their Second Amendment rights or something like that within their lawful rights as a whole. In fact, I think that this bill protects those sort of folks, anybody who is geared towards exercising their First Amendment rights, their Second Amendment rights, anything like that, because folks that aim to do them harm for the mere fact of them exercising those rights will be the ones who are addressed by this bill in the language of it.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate the opportunity and thank you for bringing this bill. I think you covered it, but just to reiterate, we've gotten some emails about how this will infringe upon activities currently taking place or particular groups organizing to protest. But what I see in the bill, and I think what you pointed out, is that Section 2, subsections 1 through 5, and I understand maybe 6 is being taken out by the amendment. All of those reference other NRS sections that are already included, and I don't see any changes to any of those sections throughout the rest of the bill. So my understanding then is by just grouping this together, you're trying to strengthen it, but it doesn't actually change anything in terms of crimes, penalties at all. So could you speak to that, and particularly around the concerns that we've heard in some of our emails about it infringing on activities that are currently existing?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. This is Assemblywoman Sandra Howdiggy. For the record, you are correct. We are not changing. We are just grouping. The only thing we are doing is, if you go to your amendment, is we're actually narrowing it down. And so any activities that are currently being performed, if they are legal in scope, they will continue to be legal after this bill passes. Nothing is from this bill is infringing or changing any legal activity.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Mosca.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this. Just my question was on Section 4 when it comes to the account. I didn't see anything about reporting when it comes next. Is that going to be included about the demographics or the groups or the work that had been done?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to let my co-presenter answer this question, Mr. Martin Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Martin Fitzgerald, for the record. So in the proposed conceptual amendment, and forgive us, we don't have a specific language, but we're working with the Department of Emergency Management, which handles Homeland Security grants, and with the proposed amendment, it'll go through that process. In part of that process is our report to the legislature and to other agencies, so we can track what agencies are applying for these grant monies, how it's being delivered, what results are we getting from them, what is left over, and so all of those are part of the existing process for Homeland Security grants, and that will be in the language as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Assemblyman Urick.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for what you're doing. As a prior law enforcement officer, I can tell you I really, really appreciate consolidated efforts to focus on problems like this. And by the way, I think that our fusion centers and our local entities are doing an amazing job of investigating these cases and trying to take them down before we can experience the consequences of this type of terrorism. My question is based on the consolidation and some of the amendments that I saw here today. It's super helpful. My question is really how did we come to the $5 million figure? That's a lot of money based on the number of incidents we've been seeing. Can you just give us some idea of how we came to that number and why? That seems to be a pretty large number to support budgets that already exist to fight this.
Martin Fitzgerald, for the record. It's a good question, and I think we have to come to a starting point at some number and then work off of that. Through discussions with law enforcement and other agencies involved in domestic terrorism, I think it's important to look at this not just as a law enforcement issue. As Director Underwood mentioned, a lot of the things, and let me take a step back here, this is also statewide. So there are a lot of communities that don't have the resources that Southern Nevada has. And so we need to, as a state, provide them the ability to actually target domestic terrorism, thwart domestic terrorism in their community. And so that's one of the reasons why we have such a large number to start with, and then work off of that within ways. But when Director Underwood mentioned off-ramping folks, and so what Southern Nevada Counterterrorism does is they work with social welfare and mental health organizations to try and get to people who are on a path to extremism and off-ramp them before they engage in acts of terrorism. And so we wanted to also provide resources for those types of efforts. And I'll invite Director Underwood to talk a little bit about that on a higher level.
Yes, Carrie Underwood for the record. We found that it's important for long-term solutions. Quite honestly, the criminal justice system is definitely a tool in our belt, but for long-term solutions with a lot of individuals that are on the pathway to violence, you really need to have your community partners, whether that's people that we can leverage, the Veterans Administration to help, our school district partners to help, our county services that offer social services, mental health services, as well as a lot of private sector entities that are looking for ways to offer those same type of services to those that maybe don't have the financial means to do so, and those that do. These efforts that we partner with our community and with the DA's office have actually led to multiple instances where individuals that were on the pathway to violence, showing those mobilization indicators, have actually found a level of stability and integration with our community to where they're no longer an individual that we're concerned are going to carry out these types of violent acts. We're ideology agnostic. That's the other thing it does for us. It reinforces all of our investigators. Everyone that works in our environment is hyper-focused on the behaviors that we're seeing, those behaviors that are indicative of mobilizing to violence that have been documented by our national partners based on their analysis of these successful mass casualty incidents and mass casualty plots that have been disrupted. So it really engages our entire community in the entire process. The challenge, of course, is having enough of those resources available for the long-term sustained effort to truly off-ramp somebody into becoming part of our community that are stable and essentially made whole again.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you for the question. And thank you for bringing this bill. I always, think it's great to create a chapter where you can find the information, not only as a law enforcement, but also as a citizen of Nevada to be able to go in and, find what you're looking for. I had a question. Yeah, the Director Underwood just talked about partnerships, but you did strike Section 3, which is where the county commission may go into. That's correct? Okay. So I was just wondering, is there another part of the bill that I'm missing? I was trying to read the amendment that allows for those partnerships, and why was that section struck?
Martin Fitzgerald for the record. So that section related to specifically fusion centers, and in the course of communications with DPS and law enforcement agencies across the state, the idea was for them to develop interagency agreements so that they could tap into the resources of Clark County, of NTAC, so that they could, use them appropriately. Through the conversations, we've discovered that they have committed to working through this within existing law, so this section wasn't needed. But this isn't the section that would deal with other agencies, and that will be part of the appropriations process. So that will be when, and the language in the grant is specific. It doesn't say law enforcement, it says general agencies. And so we wanted to broaden it to include whether it's the DAs or social services or mental health professionals. We want people to bring forth good quality grant proposals, go through the grant process, say why this is important to address this issue, and then on its merits be judged, not be too restrictive or overly loose.
And if I could add, Assemblywoman Sandra Howdiggy, for the record, we specifically left that pretty broad and vague under Section 4, Sub 3, where it says must be used to award grants to state and local agencies. We didn't say law enforcement agencies, we said agencies, so that it can include some of our other community partners and nonprofits.
Thank you. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Director Underwood, can you tell us some of the places and some of the trends of where we're seeing where hate speech is coming from? Is it, on the dark web now? Is it, like Substack, or where are you seeing trends with this now?
Yes, Carrie Underwood for the record. We're seeing this largely with individuals that obviously have extreme ideological viewpoints. We'll see the hate speech play out online, openly available, for instance. We see it with propaganda campaigns that they may try to conduct in various communities. And in some instances, you'll actually see it where they'll plan gatherings where they'll publicly, display or stream what they're saying and doing. That's probably the most rare example. You don't tend to see that as much, but certainly with propaganda campaigns that they will target a certain community, certain types of locations with their propaganda materials.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question. I actually want to understand how we fought, since we have wonderful people here in law enforcement that kind of unfortunately have to be involved in some of these issues. How do we? My concern is, sometimes things fall through the crack, for instance. So I'm wondering how it works currently, how we follow up on leads. For instance, with the Parkland shooter, there were multiple alerts, whether it was the FBI, law enforcement, social services, and yet that individual, who I think we would deem as a domestic terrorist, was able to, unfortunately have a lot of carnage. How do we make sure, when we're working with the feds or the locals, that those tips that you might get really do get followed up on, and what deems, their legitimacy? And then on the opposite end of it, how do we make sure that domestic terrorists, like that definition, and I did look through it here, we know that parents were deemed domestic terrorists by the FBI in Virginia on school boards meetings. So on the two ends of it, how do we do it here in Nevada, working with the feds to make sure people aren't swept into domestic terrorism definitions that really aren't, like parents, at school board meetings, but then on the other end of the spectrum, a deadly shooting that had multiple warning signs, and then the ball being dropped through multiple agencies?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to let Director Underwood answer that question, because he can speak to how his organization currently handles that situation. Thank you, Assemblywoman.
Yes, Carrie Underwood for the record, and thank you for that, for those questions. Those were fantastic. First and foremost, I want to address the threats to violence, threats to life situation, and you referenced Florida. One of the things that we did here in the state of Nevada pursuant to that incident, myself, my colleagues at the Nevada Threat Analysis Center, and our partners at the Federal Bureau of Investigation actually developed protocols so that we are on the receiving end of those threat to life phone calls that go into the FBI. We're on the receiving end of those immediately, and have protocols to make sure that information is passed to the appropriate law enforcement entity anywhere in the state, so that they can take mitigative action to try to ensure that act of violence, to include a specific threat to life, does not occur. We've had that program in place since the beginning of 2021. 2022. And it's been effective. It's working flawlessly. We actually track every single one of those all three agencies to ensure that we received it, that it was followed up on by a law enforcement agency, and that if it needs long-term follow-up, that's occurring, depending on which jurisdiction it is, those organizations address that. Additionally, with all of our threat actors or threat individuals, threat situations that we occur, we make sure that there is visibility not only in our center with the different agencies that are here. Every agency sees every threat. We also share those threats with our partners at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and via information sharing with our other partners at the Nevada Threat Analysis Center. So the key there is visibility of these threats, and then we have internal processes to follow that threat vetting process to conclusion. If that conclusion is a criminal justice solution, then we actually continue that process. If that means incarceration, naturally those individuals will re-enter society some point. So we make sure we put procedures in place to keep track of that. Again, the long-term off-ramping, which is our preference, to make sure that we're engaged with those individuals until they truly, from an entire holistic perspective, are stable and active members of our community. Regarding the other incident or other question that you asked, how do we not have a slippery slope into things that we shouldn't focus on? The focus of everything that we do is on individuals that are with those indicators to violent and criminal activity. And that is reinforced on a daily basis here at our center, and I know with our partners at the Nevada Threat Analysis Center as well.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill because I think it is critical, and we know that extremism and acts of violence are unfortunately on the rise in many places, and I appreciate the attempt to really just make it easier for our law enforcement agencies to keep us safe. And so I just had a question. I really appreciated the protections for protest, and I noticed specifically that civil disobedience was carved out. And so I just wondered if you could speak to those protections on legitimate protests that are still embedded within this bill.
Thank you, and that was an important part of this. And to the previous question, to make sure we focus throughout this bill, focus it on real threats and not perceived threats, and that we protected fundamental constitutional rights. I'll let Chief Deputy Attorney Dickerson address your specific legal question. Martin Fitzgerald for the record, sorry.
Thank you. Michael Dickerson for the record. With this particular amendment that we have here, we see civil disobedience that's actually defined in the amendment. Now, civil disobedience has always been carved out of our terrorism law here in the state of Nevada since it became law in 2003. The benefit that we have now is that we get to strengthen that protection for peaceful protest by actually defining it here and making clear that we're protecting people's rights to peacefully protest, as we have throughout the history of America, from the ideas and writings of Thomas Jefferson to the practices of Dr. Martin Luther King. That's why it's so important that we have this particular provision here and the amendment which actually defines civil disobedience in the bill.
Okay, thank you for that. I believe everyone's had an opportunity for their first round of questions, so we're going to return to Assemblyman Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the themes that's been touched on is basically psychological issues, stuff like that. Couldn't this money better be spent identifying those people, especially our youth in schools, that could, benefit from psychological care prior to ever getting to this point? Early intervention, early care, early treatment, and prevent the problem from ever arising.
Thank you for the question. The current grant process allows that. So if schools wanted to apply for money for youth mental health programs, they could do that through this grant process. Sandra Howdigi for the record.
Thank you for that. Next question will be from Vice Chair Marzola.
Thank you, Majority Leader, and thank you so much for bringing this bill. So I just wanted to confirm one more time, because I want to say that one of my colleagues brought up all the emails that everyone's been sending. This is already existing law, correct?
Assemblywoman Sandra Howdige, for the record, yes.
We are absolutely not changing anything, just making it more concise under one chapter to make it easier for law enforcement, correct?
Correct. We are taking current definitions in various parts of NRS, putting them into one chapter, and we are actually narrowing it down to, again, define domestic terrorism and protect peaceful protests. So we're actually making it more narrow.
And the appropriation of $5 million, obviously, it's going to go for the benefit of our community so everybody can be safe in this very trying times that we've been having with gun violence, correct?
Sandra Howdige, for the record, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I would just like to follow up on the Vice Chair's question before we open it up for testimony. This isn't specifically just for gun violence. Terrorist activity, domestic terrorism doesn't always include gun violence. Is that correct?
Sandra Howdige, for the record, that is correct.
Thank you for that. Okay, and so with that, I'd like to open it up in testimony of support of Assembly Bill 117. And I believe that there are many people here that would like to testify on this bill. So I ask everyone to keep their comments brief to around 2 minutes. We will first open it up to those in support here in Carson City. While people are moving up to the table, I will give the phone number for the public who would like to call in. The number to call in is 1-888-475-4499, and the meeting ID is 830-421-88114. And with that, we will begin with testimony in support of AB 117 here in Carson City.
Good morning, Chair Miller and committee. My name is Lisa Lynn Chapman, and I am the Nevada Disinformation State Manager with Battleborn Progress. And I am testifying on behalf of my organization in support of AB 117. According to James Piazza, a Penn State professor focusing on terrorism and counterterrorism, in the article Fake News, The Effects of Social Media Disinformation on Domestic Terrorism is fueled by disinformation. Experts theorize that the consumption of disinformation fuels distrust in the media and increased hostility towards liberal and centrist political figures and social and political institutions. Additionally, disinformation creates a heightened tolerance of radical political actors and movements. And even more alarming, the consumption of disinformation also helps weaken support for democracy and creates an acceptance of totalitarianism. That's hard in the morning. Furthermore, constant exposure to disinformation and conspiracy theories often fuel ethnic, racial, partisan, and social group grievances. As the Nevada Disinformation State Manager with Battleborn Progress, I follow known bad actors in disinformation throughout the state. I have read calls for civil war and how we need to protect America from them. Them are usually LGBTQ people, people of color, or immigrants. I read and warn about rises in hate speech, which directly contributes to Americans' safety and dignity. This is happening online every day by Nevadans against Nevadans. I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but I am raising the alarm. We need a stronger defense against the disinformation wars that are currently happening in our state. And this is why Battleborn Progress is asking you to support AB 117. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we proceed, I should mention too, again, we're not sure exactly how many people there are to testify, but want to make sure we get in as many people as possible on all three sides of the argument. That would be support, neutral, and opposition. Please remember that the rules of the committee are if you have anything about the bill as presented per the amendments that you do not appreciate, please remember that would be an opposition testimony. Also, we're going to provide 30 minutes for each, because again, don't know how many are on the phone, but there will be 30 minutes for each side in testimony. So with that, please proceed in support.
Good morning. I'm Anthony Shafton of Reno. Thank you, Chairperson and members. I commend Assemblywoman Hargi for introducing a bill promising to stem the illegal activities of private armed militias or paramilitaries. The bill specifically cites half a dozen existing NRSs. It might cite several more. 197-120 on impersonating a law officer, 202-320 on exhibiting deadly weapons in a threatening manner, and 203-040 on publishing incitements to violence. But my main purpose in testifying today is to encourage an amendment providing for civil actions against paramilitaries. Why are civil lawsuits necessary? Because up till now, Nevada's law enforcement agencies at all levels have failed to bring existing statutes to bear on paramilitaries for three reasons: the difficulty of enforcing the law as written, political expediency in a purple state, and perhaps even sympathy with extremist agendas. Civil actions against paramilitaries aren't unprecedented. For example, after the notorious Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, private citizens, joined by the city, won $26 million in damages for physical and emotional injuries, and an injunction barring further such manifestations. Dayton, Ohio won an injunction against the KKK, and New Mexico has sued, challenging a paramilitary group's right to operate as a militia under state law. Oregon is...
Sir, again, according to the rules of the committee, if you're suggesting an amendment, that would be that you're not completely supporting the bill. So I would have to move your testimony to opposition. I know that feels like a very specific line, but those are the rules of the committee, and you are more than welcome to submit your amendment and your suggestions to the committee.
I've already done so.
Okay, so that's the other amendment that we have? Okay.
Does that mean that I get to testify again?
I don't know about that part, but I think we have definitely heard and taken your points well.
Okay, I just want to say that Oregon is currently considering a bill for civil penalties.
Thank you so much, sir.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the committee. I'm Director Beth Schmidt, representing the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. In the interest of time, I do want to say that we appreciate all of the hard work of Assemblywoman Hardigay in bringing forward this bill and the proposed amendment. I do want to say one thing. One of the things we do as an agency is we do invite our elected officials to we do encourage you to do ride-alongs with our patrol officers. In that same vein, I want to extend that invitation to all of you after the session. If you are interested in visiting our Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Center, please just let us know that and we can help facilitate that. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department supports AB 117.
Thank you. And one more additional tidbit. I'm not in committee one day and I forget everything. Asking everyone to not just state their name, but spell it so we have it correct for the record as well.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. My name is John Jones, Jones, here on behalf of the Nevada District Attorneys Association in support of AB 117. I want to start off by thanking Majority Leader Hardigay for her leadership on this issue. She reached out in the interim and began working with various law enforcement agencies, including district attorneys, on this bill. It is an important consolidation and cleanup to our terrorism statutes, and it also makes some significant investment in our counterterrorism task force and fusion center. So we are in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Greg Herrera, Herrera, representing Nevada Sheriff and Chiefs Association. The Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association is in support of Assembly Bill 117. We'd like to thank Majority Leader Hardigay for bringing this bill forward and assisting law enforcement across the state by providing much-needed support and resources in addressing domestic terrorism. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Miller, members of the committee. Jason Walker, Jasonwalker, Washington County Sheriff's Office, testifying in support of Assembly Bill 117. It's sad to say that's not a matter of if this will happen again, but when. This is a great proactive step to align resources in the event of another major domestic incident in the great state of Nevada.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else here in Carson City that would like to testify in support? Not seeing anyone. Broadcasting, will you please open the lines?
To testify in support to Assembly Bill 117, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Hello, my name is Clint Ullman. I am testifying in support of the bill, and I would like to start off by quoting a gentleman named Emin Bundy. The vast majority of militia seem to hang on hate, fear, and warmongering. And Emin Bundy didn't want to be associated with warmongers. The key issues are probably $5 million is enough, maybe a good start. Local law enforcement are not doing their jobs. They're allowing illegal militias. But this will be a good step to make it better. Thank you very much for your time.
Sir, could you also spell your name for the record, please? Are you still there, sir? Okay, broadcasting, next caller.
Caller with the last 3 digits 938, you are unmuted and may begin.
Hello, committee members. Thank you so much for holding this meeting, and Assemblywoman Spargy for sponsoring it. My name is Vivian Leal, L-E-A-L. I'm an advocate and columnist in Nevada on behalf of women, patients with chronic illness, voting rights, and gun safety. I often speak at public events, as is my First Amendment right. The last few years have been difficult. The increased presence of groups parading in costume at events, armed to the hilt, hugging weapons to their chests, has definitely made all of us question our safety. Many have chosen not to continue to speak out for fear. We know this is part of the terrorist intent to intimidate. We know all it takes is just one person with a grievance and a gun to destroy and change lives forever. Never mind the possible damage from these coordinated groups parading in our midst. Our law enforcement and attorney general need stronger, clear laws about the legality of this behavior. Citizens deserve to feel safe. Please vote for this bill. It's a beginning, and I would support the amendment suggested by Mr. Shafton. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
If you have recently joined and would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 117, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. There are no other callers choosing to testify in support at this time.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, then I will open it up for opposition testimony for Assembly Bill 117, starting here in Carson City first.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Janine Hansen. I'm the state president of the Independent American Party. In 2003, after 9/11, we had a bill here to put the federal Patriot Act language definition in our law. We opposed that, along with the ACLU, and were able to get it much narrowed from what it is nationally. After that, there was a full-color picture of me in the paper with the headline, "Janine the Terrorist." Now, that is why we have to be concerned about this particular bill, because of how it may be interpreted. One of President George Washington said, "Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master." When you're giving $5 million to law enforcement, this incentivizes them to do what? Like under the Patriot Act, it incentivized additional spying on our citizens, political spying, and additional surveillance. We're concerned about those because they interfere with our constitutional liberties of privacy and the Fourth Amendment. And due process, which is what the Federal Patriot Act did. We do appreciate the amendments, which make it more clear and particularly identify the definition of civil disobedience. We are concerned about some of the testimony which has taken place considering hate speech and disinformation, because we will probably be charged with hate speech and disinformation just because we disagree with others who may be in the community. You know, in 2004, I was arrested when I was petitioning on the bus depot in Reno, arrested for legal petitioning, handcuffed, put into a paddy wagon, and hauled up to Parr Boulevard. Also, my son was, and others in Las Vegas were arrested and put in jail for the same thing. Ultimately, we were exonerated all the way to the Nevada Supreme Court. But we know that sometimes government oversteps their bounds, and we have to be very careful of how we define these things, and be considerably narrow definitions are important.
Now, Ms. Hanson, you're over 2 minutes right now. Could you wrap it up?
I'll finish up right now.
Thank you.
Our one concern is the cooperation with the FBI, who has identified parents who testify at school board as possible domestic terrorists. Thank you. Be very careful. It's a dangerous bill.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hanson. Next, please.
Lynn Chapman, CHAPMAN. I'm the State Vice President of Nevada Families for Freedom. Excuse me. Brian Michael Jenkins is a senior advisor to the president of the nonprofit Nonpartisan RAND Corporation. He's been researching terrorism for RAND since 1972. He wrote an article in February of 2021, and part of it says, American society traditionally has tolerated a wide range of behavior in political protest, even as participants cross the line from lawful to unlawful and peaceful to violent. If conduct becomes bad enough, as in aggravated assaults or looting, ordinary criminals can be applied. Ordinary criminal laws can be applied. If there are specific shortcomings in our laws, Congress can address them without using the word terrorism. Likewise, if there are hindrances to collecting intelligence or opening investigations, those things can probably be dealt with through adjustments in the Attorney General's guidelines with congressional oversight. Dealing with increased violence by domestic extremists may be the greatest legal challenge and politically the most delicate undertaking this nation has faced since the Civil War, but our current criminal statutes are adequate. They have been used successfully to weaken previous cohorts of white supremacists and defeat the left-wing bombers of the 1970s. Instead of a new domestic terrorism law, this moment calls for rigorous and equal enforcement of existing law, creating offenders as ordinary criminals and avoiding legislation that may undermine Americans' rights and create labels that deepen the current political divide. Maybe we should heed the experts' words. We all know we can trust government to be government. Thank you.
Casey Rogers for the record, or Rogers with a D. I kind of find it kind of ironic that I'm sitting here having to talk about these kind of bills lately coming through in the hundreds, almost it feels like every day. I feel like all these states around us are turning into these totalitarian states, and here I am living in Nevada, why it's slowly turning into one. I went to UNR and I sat in a classroom with younger people than me, sitting there listening to Karl Marx and the communism and all these things that are happening, just being glorified after communism killed millions and millions of people. Yet our children 18 to 25, while their brains are still developing and away from their parents now, are being used to indoctrinate and train and to become minions to an ideology. And in those classrooms, they couldn't even find whether domestic terrorism was okay because Black Lives Matter had a point to make, or if Antifa's points were valid, or if the patriots that stormed the Capitol when they were actually invited in to begin with. Which side do you choose? It just depends on how you look at things. Are you patriots, all of you? You know, the Antifa movement and the Black Lives Matter movement literally burned and killed people, burned cities and killed people, and they said it was justified. And they say that the patriots going into the Capitol building wasn't justified because they were unhappy with their leaders. So I have to oppose this bill 100% because of that stuff alone, because you guys can't even decide what's what and who's who.
Okay, ma'am, your 2 minutes are up, and we have quite a number of people on the phone. So I want to we started at 8:50. And
I think I've said what I needed to say.
And so we started at 8:50, and I want to make sure everyone on the phone has an opportunity to speak as well. So again, please, let's be as brief as possible. If you want to say ditto, that's appreciated too. Please proceed.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Melissa Clement, C-L-E-M-E-N-T, with Nevada Right to Life. I find myself in an interesting situation because I'm married to a former law enforcement agent or officer. So I definitely understand the challenges law enforcement deal with, but I also am a pro-speech, pro-free speech advocate. And I would just like to read the following 2 paragraphs just to show you what my concern is. This is from the Daily Signal a couple of weeks ago. And it's concerning a congressional hearing. Senator Mike Lee of Utah was asking questions of Merrick Garland concerning investigations into the the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, FACE Act. And he asked, in 2022, and for the first couple of months of 2023, DOJ's announced charges against 34 individuals for blocking access or to vandalizing abortion clinics. And there have been over 81 recorded attacks on pregnancy centers, 130 attacks on Catholic churches since the leak of the Dobbs decision, and only 2 individuals have been charged. This is just an example of what you as lawmakers need to be so very careful about. It's challenging. You have to provide safety for all of us, and I understand that domestic terrorism can be a real thing, definitely. But you have to craft it in such a way that law enforcement doesn't swing the balance to either side. When the Patriot Act was passed, my particular political party was behind it. And at the time I said, this is a terrible idea because someday my political party may not be in charge. And these very difficult rules will be turned to us. And so that is my only point. I appreciate the work you guys are doing. And I hope that you will remember free speech as well as our safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Please proceed.
My name is Richard Nagel, for the record, N-A-G-E-L. One of the things that bothers me about this bill is free speech. I myself testify at school board meetings from time to time, and one of the things I'm working for is trying to get a job description and also an evaluation for the superintendent so that this person can get graded on their performance, and that we have real world metrics instead of subjective matter. Okay? So one supervisor would give a 4, another would give a 2 in the same category. There's no reason for that. They should all have the data and make a good decision on that. So again, when I come up and I state my case, I become a domestic terrorist for testifying at a school board meeting. This is something that scares the heck out of me, okay? Because all I want is the betterment for our schools, and we're 50th in the nation as far as that goes. We need to have a dissenting voice, someone who says, this is not out of the box. This is what every industry does, every business does. They have a continuous quality improvement. And here, I am a domestic terrorist now. Okay? I don't get it. I just want the betterment of the society and the betterment of our schools. So please, think about this, okay, in that aspect. Because when does hate speech, the dissenting vote, become hate speech, and you are taken away from the discussion? We really need to look at that. Thank you much for your time.
Thank you. And we're going to take these next two testimonies here in Carson, and then we're going to move to the phones.
Good morning. Joy Trushinsky, Trushenski, for the record. I oppose AB 117 as it goes against the U.S. Constitution for right to bear arms, right to assemble, and freedom of speech. Especially my objection to the amendment definition of civil disobedience, meaning open and visible nonviolent violation of a misdemeanor law, done intentionally, symbolically, or with the expectation of being punished. This is subjective. Domestic terrorism is violent in nature. Civil disobedience is not. Would this bill mean that Antifa and BLM would they be targeted as a domestic terrorist organizations? Both organizations were supported by Democrat leadership. Both organization members rioted, burned businesses, attacked police and mega supporters, causing injury. 4 people were killed in the Summer of Love in 2022. Very few of these rioters were ever prosecuted. I oppose this bill because it is subjective, and we have a right to demonstrate our opposition to policies of our government. And I think this is a dangerous bill. I remember A.G. Garland talking about parents who go to school boards, they are domestic terrorists. I mean, that to me is outrageous. I mean, totally outrageous, just because the parents objected to what was being taught in school. So please vote no on this bill. I support the money can be used in other ways, like to support
Ma'am?
Traffic, getting...
Ma'am, can you wrap it up, please?
Okay, yeah. This could be used, the money could be used in support of going after child sex traffickers. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam and the committeemen. I am Susan Rue, spelled R-U-C-H, and I am opposed to this bill. Once more, this legislation seems to be very subjective. Who is a domestic terrorist? In 2022, we saw Antifa tearing up the city after city, and they were never put on the domestic terrorist list. We are now watching a two-tiered justice system in our country, and we do not need this for our state. I'm sure that many people sitting here at this time feel that they would be the ones that they would be targeted by this legislation. Going forward, it could be you, it could be someone else that could be labeled a terrorist. This bill just is not great, and I think you should really think about it. We just do not need more laws, and we do not need the government just overseeing everything we do. Thank you very much for your time. And by the way, 94% of the public last night at midnight opposed this bill, and that was 94%. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. And with that, broadcasting will go to the phones, please.
To testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 117, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 643, please press star 6 to unmute your phone.
Wizard, Wizrouzard. I am calling in my own personal endeavor as a Nevadan, as an African American who believes in the Constitution. I strongly oppose AB 117. To follow up, Mr. Assemblyman Gray had asked some very specific questions that went unanswered, and these are one of the few reasons why I object this bill. Not only does it violate the federal law, but it violates our Constitution. And more importantly, when we talk about domestic terrorists, we need to really consider the government in itself. It was just through a FOIA request that we found out that Martin Luther King himself was assassinated by the government. But nothing happened to any government official. No laws were changed. If anything, the institution was empowered to be utilized against those that the government, which was in power, opposed. This bill strengthens that. It doesn't strengthen the Constitution, it shreds it. More importantly, when we talk about individuals exercising their constitutional rights, we're talking about American values. This bill goes against American values. As African American who often goes out there and actually protests, this goes against my ability to safely protest. And more importantly, when I'm talking about safety, I'm talking about law enforcement being utilized against particular groups. It was at one point during COVID when the Black Panthers were protesting, open carrying, exercising their constitutional rights. There was discussions about using the federal government to actually go in and arrest these individuals for exercising their rights. So to what some of the supporters have said, we need to be very cautious in regards to what power we give the government and ensure that any existing laws, especially AB 117, talking about certain NR statutes that have been in place, we need to be talking about repealing them, not empowering them, not making them concise, not trying to narrow them. When we talk about the Constitution, we need to reinforce them. So I urge everyone to please, please, please oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 320, please press star 6 to unmute your phone.
Hello, my name is Anthony Lambert, Lambert. I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. I am opposed to this bill because time after time, laws like these are used to target leftists and activists, not right-wing extremists. Assemblywoman Howdy cited an Anti-Defamation League report that extremism is on the rise. Assemblywoman also failed to mention that the exact same report cites that there were 0 incidences of left-wing extremism. Yet this bill labels syndicalism, an old term that refers to union members and socialists, as domestic terrorists. This bill does not specifically target any right-wing ideology. Assemblywoman said that police don't want to have to search through NRS to find a reason to arrest someone. They want it to be easy. However, investigating, arresting, and incarcerating someone shouldn't be easy. In Georgia, police used their domestic terrorism laws to arrest individuals and label them as domestic terrorists because they had mud on their shoes during a music festival in a forest more than a mile away from a site of a protest. They used the domestic terrorism laws because they were easy, and they had no other legal reason to arrest these individuals. Mr. Underwood cited his agency works with FBI in joint terrorism pursuits. However, these task forces have a long history of being politically motivated, going after leftists, activists, and especially people of color. In 2020, the FBI worked with local police forces in various cities in Colorado and Arizona to infiltrate Black Lives Matter groups and attempt to manufacture crimes, thankfully unsuccessfully. As Assemblywoman Hansen points out, domestic terrorism laws have been used to label a broad range of individuals as terrorists for simply speaking out against their government. This bill is not just to organize existing laws into one chapter. It's not. Law enforcement organizations and Assemblywoman Howdy have said that this bill is to increase police's ability to surveil and pursue individuals who, quote, oppose government. This bill expands police power. It takes broken, barely constitutional statutes, amplifies them, and then applies critical resources towards their enforcement. Critical resources that Assemblywoman Gray points
Sir,
out
can
to
you
be
wrap
used
up
for
your
terrorist
comments,
prevention.
please? Your 2 minutes are up, and we have a number
The
of people on the line, so please feel free to submit the rest of your comments to the committee. Thank you.
The only possible
Next
outcome
caller.
is that this will be used to spy and incarcerate activists. who
Broadcasting,
protest
next
power.
caller.
Yes, my name is Leslie Quinn. I oppose AB 117. While I do not want domestic terrorism, I also want balance in legislation that defines what or who is a domestic terrorist. I believe when we have the White House secretary blaming Republicans for the shooting of 3 9-year-olds and 3 school staff, a transgender gal that focused on shooting up this school, we need to define who domestic terrorists are. This AB 117 is just another legislation being put in against our First Amendment rights. When Republicans are blamed because they don't have better A2, Second Amendment regulation, listen, the people that get guns are criminals. These are not people that are wanting to be able to protect their freedom. Please vote against, and I oppose AB 117. It is not a good law to add. Use the money to help more mental health. The sad thing is that unfortunately a lot of legislation that is currently in this 82nd session is going to create more mental health issues. We are humans, we are humankind. Let's support humanity and stay focused on that. We're all on the same planet. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next caller.
Hello, my name is Katie Banuelos, Banuelos, and I'm testifying today on behalf of the Libertarian Party of Nevada. We oppose AB 117 and we ask you to vote against it. The definition of domestic terrorism codified in this bill is overly broad and jeopardizes civil liberties. Could be interpreted to include certain forms of protest, civil disobedience, or speech, and places constitutionally protected activities into a gray area. The supporters of this bill point out that it doesn't create any new crimes. What it does is take a range of offenses that are currently misdemeanors and reclassify them as terrorism, and that's not a good thing. If a particular activity could be considered a misdemeanor on one hand and domestic terrorism on the other, then the term terrorism has been rendered meaningless. By creating a mandate for these investigations, providing funding for them, and then having such an incredibly low bar for what's considered worthy of pursuit, AB 117 opens the door to entrapment schemes and harassment of dissidents. This bill poses a risk to the citizenry by enabling unconstrained investigations into groups or individuals for what would otherwise not be considered serious criminal activity. Imagine that power in the hands of your worst political enemy. Violence, incitement to violence, and criminal conspiracy are already punishable by law. Misinformation or speech and misdemeanors are not terrorism. Amendments won't fix this. This bill creates a platform for political prosecution or persecution, and it's only a matter of time until it's abused. We ask you to please vote no on AB 117. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Good morning, Chair and Committee. My name is Jim DeGraffenreid, Degraffenreid. I'm Nevada's Republican National Committeeman representing the Nevada Republican Party in opposition to AB 117. We're all aware of the importance of having investigative and prevention resources available to combat legitimate threats of violence or terrorism. However, we already have in place well-funded agencies who are successfully fulfilling this function. To add $5 million to these efforts is definitely out of proportion to the threats that we may face in Nevada. In addition, the consolidation of this language in a single section may alter the understanding and application of the law, particularly in conjunction with other legislation under consideration by this legislature, specifically SB 227, which would put vague and subjective language defining so-called hate speech into statute. AB 117 would create new meaning and unacceptably infringe on the First and Second Amendment rights of Nevada citizens, allowing the state to define them as domestic terrorists when they may be nothing more than a parent at a school board meeting questioning the curriculum. We are in an environment where we sometimes see law enforcement and the justice system weaponized against political opposition, while legitimate acts of violence are often overlooked if they're committed by groups such as BLM or pro-abortion activists as referenced earlier. In such an environment, AB 117, particularly in conjunction with bills such as SB 227, endangers liberty, and we urge this committee to protect Nevada citizens by rejecting this bill and allowing our state and local agencies to continue their existing work against legitimate threats of terrorism and violence. Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate everyone making their comments concise and as brief as possible. Next caller.
Caller with the last three digits, 456. You are unmuted and may begin.
Good morning, Oscar Williams, OSCARWILLIAMS, for the record, from Reno, Nevada. I'm against this bill. I'd like to focus on an issue that has not been addressed before, and that is the fact that the governor has the authority to convene a militia should he or she see the need for it. The governor's going to want people who know how to use a gun and have some acumen in terms of gun use, and this bill could deter citizens from gaining that skill and that knowledge in support of the governor if and when called to duty. I guarantee the governor's going to veto this bill based on that alone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next call.
Good morning, Bob Russo for the record. I strongly oppose AB 117. In my opinion, this bill could be used to intimidate parents and lawful Nevadans who rightfully choose to attend school board meetings and express concerns about what their children are being taught or other activities in our schools. And it could be used against those that disagree with healthcare mandates, as we experienced during the COVID episode a couple of years ago. If we do not have freedom of speech in this country, we no longer live in a free country, a free land. If criticism is perceived by certain individuals as hate speech because it challenges the status quo and can land someone behind bars for years, what kind of America are we living in? The Bill of Rights became part of the Constitution because our founders and other state legislatures at the time understood that as government expands, it tends to grow more tyrannical and oppressive. And we now see this happening in state governments with that very intention for that to become part of Nevada as well. I believe that setting aside $5 million into an account to counter domestic terror activity is nothing short of wasteful. It's an expansion of government and a faulty solution to a problem that I believe does not exist. All in all, I believe this bill is dangerous and a threat to our liberty, be it the right to free speech, due process, or the right of self-defense. Please, please oppose this very concerning bill. By the way, I just checked. As of a few minutes ago, there were 6 people in support of this bill, 145 opposed, and 1 neutral. I think that says something significant right there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next caller.
Hello, my name is Adrian Lowry. I'm an organizer with the Northern Nevada DSA. I'm speaking in opposition to this bill because the changes and appropriations of $5 million to support fusion centers will harm minority communities and environmentalists in Nevada. The FBI has a long history of surveilling, infiltrating, and criminalizing Black activists engaged in legal political action. Most infamously, they used government resources to disrupt the popular movements of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. The FBI infiltrated the Black Panthers to frame and assassinate members. They assassinated the young Black leader Fred Hampton when he was only 21 years old. They killed him by first having an informant dose him with drugs, then raiding his home and firing bullets into his sleeping body. They did this in partnership with the Chicago Police Department. After the terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, the FBI refocused their efforts to do the same thing to Muslim communities. They began to spy on all major mosques in this country. They developed informants to go into these mosques and encourage members of the Muslim communities to engage in terrorist activities. Often they were able to pressure Muslims with developmental disabilities or mental health problems to engage in terrorism plans that were entirely planned by the FBI. More recently, the FBI created a new category of terrorism to go after Black Lives Matter protests. They call this category Black Identity Extremists. In Denver, Colorado, they employed a violent criminal to infiltrate the Black Lives Matter movement there. This informant pressured members of the Black Lives Matter movement to engage in violent or terrorist actions. Currently in Atlanta, Georgia, there are protests against the construction of a police training facility. More than 40 protesters have been charged with terrorism charges for engaging in protest, including a legal observer for the Southern Poverty Law Center. Similarly to the killings in the civil rights era, the police have assassinated a young activist named Tortuguita. These protesters are being charged under a law that was passed under the guise of addressing terrorists like Dylan Roof, who killed 10 black churchgoers. But we continue to see that no matter the intention, these powers are used most often against black-led movements and environmental activists. A fusion center in Ohio is using their counterterrorism powers to go after environmental activists in the wake of the East Palestine train derailment. They've labeled famous environmental activist
Sir,
Aaron
can you
Brockovich
wrap up your
a possible
comments? You've been
terrorist
over
threat.
2 minutes.
Yes.
And please,
Yes. Very chilling.
and again, you can continue. You can submit the remainder of your comments to the committee, please.
Okay. No matter how well-intentioned this funding is,
Okay, sir, we're going to have you wrap it up because there's a number of people.
Have a good day.
Thank you. And again, I'm asking that we're already over time, so I've already granted over a half hour. So I need the comments to be brief. We still have another bill to hear, okay? So next caller.
Hi, my name is Lorena Cardenas, LORENA-CARDENAS. This is a blatant attempt to violate our constitutional rights. With the Biden administration labeling parents who speak up at board meetings as domestic terrorists, why is it you're choosing to introduce this bill now? Why didn't you introduce this bill when Black Panthers were parading with rifles during BLM riots? Why didn't you introduce this when BLM supporters shot our police officer, Shamie Colonis, a few years ago? You're doing it now when conservatives are being targeted for speaking up against the indoctrination and sexualization of our kids via the trans and LGBT movement. Am I a domestic terrorist for using my First Amendment right to disagree with this? The only intimidation that is happening in government is towards us, Christians. Don't pretend it's the other way around. This is another tool to intimidate us. When we carry guns, it is to defend ourselves from actual terrorists using BLM and Antifa. Yet we are the domestic terrorists. Stop trying to label us. Stop trying to silence us. Stop trying to disarm us so we can end up sitting ducks to the people who you decide to agree with. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Hello, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Nate Tekle, Tekle. I oppose this bill on its face, and I believe that all those statutes that are laid out within this bill, consolidated, as Haraji said, or as Assemblywoman Haraji said, could just, instead of the consolidation occurring in these laws being labeled domestic terror statutes, prosecutors could still prosecute people under the crimes and the statutes that are created here. And to consider them domestic terrorism, I think, is a bit of a stretch. And I believe the domestic, or the quote-unquote domestic terrorism issue in the state of Nevada can really be solved with laws that protect mental health resources and fund them fully, so that schools and community health partners can actually send money into areas where a lot of people that would be considering domestic terrorism can actually get support and funding so that they do not engage in crimes like these. Thank you for the time. You guys have a nice day.
Thank you. Next caller.
Hello, good morning. For the record, my name is Sean Navarro, and I'm a member of the Las Vegas Democratic Socialists of America. I'm calling in opposition to AB 117 for very different reasons than people who have spoken before me. I find it ironic that we're speaking about this bill a few days after Cesar Chavez Day, a man who was accused of being a terrorist many times in his life. I'd also point to the situation that's happening at the Tennessee State House, where members of their House representatives are being expelled for showing dissent. I feel the terms criminal anarchy and criminal syndicalism that are described in NRS 203, 115, and 203, 117 are intentionally vague and could be very easily used to target people for even having something as a book club. I feel that while I'm very much against domestic terrorism, law enforcement does have the adequate funding and tools to tackle this issue already. A lot of talk about the school board, and as someone who attends school board meetings, I can tell you for months, far-right active or whatever they want to call themselves, bullied fellow members of the school board. The local police, for whatever reason, did nothing to stop them. And I think that's one example of how we have the tools that are needed to tackle this issue, but for the reason they're not being used. And just in general, I'm against more funding for the police, and I feel this is overreach by law enforcement. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next caller.
Hello, my name is Val Thomason. I'm also a member of the DSA, and I'm calling in opposition to this bill. As an activist, I'm also concerned with some of these definitions, namely anarchy and syndicalism, which targets the left wing. While it has been insisted that this simply groups these laws together, criminal syndicalism laws were found unconstitutional in 1969 by the Supreme Court in Brandenburg versus Ohio. But this problem goes deeper than those definitions. The ACLU has been speaking out on these types of task forces for decades. The vast majority of terrorism task forces have never pursued any violent groups and have instead spent the majority of their time pursuing peaceful left-wing protesters and Black, brown, and Muslim communities. In fact, 5 major cities have already chosen to disband their joint terrorism task forces after it was revealed that they targeted only those groups. These task forces already exist. These laws already exist in other states, and we've seen and witnessed the outcome. No amount of reassurances by law enforcement should be equal to decades of research and witnessed accounts. Passing this bill will not only harm minority communities, but this bill will undo all the criminal justice work that this Democratic supermajority has put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Caller with the last 3 digits 959, please press *6 to unmute your phone.
For the record, my name is Attar Hasibullah, first name spelled A-T-H-A-R, last name H-A-S-E-E-B-U-L-L-A-H. I'm the Executive Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Nevada. We are opposed to this bill in its current iteration based on much of the testimony that was provided earlier with our constitutional concerns related to the First Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. But we are happy to speak with the bill sponsor directly to address those concerns. And we think everyone who has already shared their stories, we won't belabor the point. So that is our testimony today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Next caller.
Hi, Tracy Thomas, Tracey-Thomas. Overall, I do agree with the majority of AB 117. However, since the parameters of support require an all or nothing buy-in, I am forced to oppose the majority of bills on the premise that everything has room for improvement. The important element of this bill that must be amended is the removal of the word perceived. It is imperative to address actual events of domestic terrorism. However, the introduction of perceived terrorism is a direct violation of our national and state constitution and an assault on our freedom and speech of religion. The term perceived must be removed from the entire bill in order to have any chance of averting a veto. For instance, we can perceive the acts being committed within our schools and universities as acts of terrorism. One could perceive a religious gathering inside churches as domestic terrorism. Perception by nature is speculative and open to misinterpretation. One could perceive someone choosing not to wear a mask or not to get a vaccine shot as a domestic terrorism. The perception of harm is a choice of a frame of mind and not a fact. Action should only be taken on facts, not ideologies. We have already seen an abuse of power being employed to weaponize our law enforcement for political agendas and not actual threats to our safety or violation of laws. So please amend the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Caller with the last 3 digits 452, please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Hi, my name is Lisa Partee, P as in Paul, A-R-T as in Tom, E-E. I vehemently oppose AB 117. This is a very dangerous bill that intends to put law-abiding citizens into the category of a domestic terrorist based on perceptions. As Mr. Underwood states, trends on hate speech with ideological opinions and spreading of propaganda, well, this is purely subjective. He describes planned gatherings spreading propaganda. That could be me. People choose to consider my opinions propaganda because they disagree with it. If I want to peacefully protest, Will I now be arrested? The woman from Battleborn Progressives who first spoke in favor stresses my point greatly. She feels one way, I feel the other. Who decides which person's opinions are wrong and illegal? That's the slippery slope I fear the most. There are two sides to everything in life. People have the right to opinions. It's guaranteed in our Constitution. And people have to be able to speak freely without fear of being arrested for having those opinions. Let's arrest those who actually cause true harm to people by committing crimes and not create new agencies on the backs of the taxpayers that are intended to silence the opposition. It appears to me you're trying to follow the Biden administration's definition of those of us who are trying to protect our kids and speak out at school board meetings. That we speak out against the grooming that's been going on in our schools, the pornography in the libraries, the secret teachings in the classrooms as to gender identity, and activism as to learn to hate our flag and what it stands for. This is a very bad bill that will have many unintended or intended consequences. I'm really tired of people pushing the race, gender, sexuality in every aspect of our lives this session. Learn to take offense and deal with it like adults rather than tying up our court systems and jail systems to harm and destroy the lives of law-abiding citizens. We don't have large amounts of the issues they are describing, which tells me this is a national agenda. Please remember Janine Hansen's and Mr. DeGraffenreid's testimony and remember your oath. No on AB 117. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. This is John Puro from the Clark County Public Defenders and testifying for the Washoe County Public Defenders. There are some definitions in this conceptual amendment that are concerning. The bill as originally written caused us no concern, but this amendment does. And even though we're saying that we're not changing anything, actually these definitions do change things. As some of you may remember, I was arrested during the 2020 protest at the Field Observer, and I actually had to hire a lawyer to fight that case. But what some of you may not know is that I actually tried a case specifically against Mr. Dickerson, where he charged a veteran going through mental health issues with terrorism. The stakes were incredibly high, and thank God the jury saw through that charge and gave that man a not guilty verdict, and we sent him home to his family. But there were issues with the way the original terrorism definition is used, and there's issues with the way that this could be used. I apologize to the bill sponsor that we did not get a chance to talk to her before this. It's bad form on our part, but this conceptual amendment caught us off guard. We look forward to talking with her and working through things because we have no issue with increased funding and watching out for some of these things, but some of these definitions are highly concerning. And I just want to pause to say that oftentimes in these types of bills, we bring up Martin Luther King, but we always need to remember that he was considered a terrorist himself and put on the FBI's watch list during his time when he was alive. And John Lewis was not considered a special citizen, someone that we cared for during all of those times. So there are ways that we need to go about and we address these, and the conceptual amendment we believe is overbroad. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
Anne-Marie Grant, ANNEMARIEGRANT. My brother was killed by Reno Police and Washoe County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling in opposition of AB 117, reiterating all the previous callers' testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
If you have recently joined and would like to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 117, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue.
Hello, my name is Amber Giroux, spelled Giroux. I want to agree with both Sean Navarro and Val Thomason. I'm a member of the Las Vegas DSA chapter, and just a couple of the other things. I absolutely agree with what everyone has said about the subjectivity of this, and I have witnessed firsthand when I worked for Bernie Sanders. I was a liaison, I guess, standing between KKK members and other far-right groups who were yelling obscenities at children, literal children, who were waiting in line to go into school. And the police were standing right there. I asked them, are you going to do anything about this? And they just shook their heads no. So who decides what the actual threats are? And who decides what the police will act on? I also want to mention the unintended consequences of also affecting marginalized groups, Black and Brown communities, disabled folks, people with mental health issues, and also mention the impact on environmental activists and how the Patriot Act really targeted environmental activists, not domestic terrorists. Thank you.
Thank you. And broadcasting, we will take these last two callers in the queue. Please continue with the next caller.
Hi, my name is Katrin Ivanov, I-V-A-N-O, Frank. I just want to point your attention to the fact that you are hearing opposition from both ends of the spectrum, the Democratic Socialists of America and also staunch Republicans, MAGA lovers, parents that were labeled terrorists. That has to give you a stop, and you have to realize that you represent us, and we are all opposed of this. I escaped a communist country to come here for the freedoms that America afforded me. And I'm very sad to see, prior to last year, I was not even involved in politics because I could care less about politics. After seeing we're losing our our constitutional rights, little by little, eroded by our lawmakers, I had to get involved, and that's why I'm calling in opposition of this bill. Stop putting your grabby hands on our hard-earned money. We're paying taxes, but you're not using it for anything we want it to be used for. You are just creating more government to be turned against us, the citizens. And I'm very happy to hear both sides are joining in opposition, because this is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is protecting our constitutional rights issue. And with that, thank you so much. And thank you for allowing longer time, because, yeah, we do have a lot to say about it. Have a lovely day.
Thank you so much. Broadcasting, last caller, please.
Hello, my name is David Beltran Barajas, DAVID-BELTRAN-BARAJAS. I'm a lifelong resident of Las Vegas, current resident of State Senate District 12, Assembly District 21. I am calling in to oppose this bill, mirroring many of my community members here, like Val and Sean. On the grounds of its language around quote-unquote criminal syndicalism. Historically, anti-domestic terrorist laws in this country have been used against folks with left-wing views, and that is the reason why I'm calling in today to oppose this. Thank you. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for that. And with that, that will conclude our testimony in opposition. I will open it up to testimony in neutral, but I want to remind everyone that neutral is neutral. It is not camouflaged opposition, okay? So with that, anyone testifying in neutral here in Carson City, please approach. All right. Not seeing anyone in Carson City. Broadcasting, is there anyone on the line that would like to testify in neutral?
To testify in neutral to Assembly Bill 117, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. There are no callers choosing to testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate that everyone understands what neutral means. With that, I see that we have our Majority Leader back for any final remarks.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll keep these brief. I know you have another bill to hear, but so many of our communities have experienced tragedy, not just here in Nevada, but across our country by domestic terrorism. And I believe that Assembly Bill 117 serves as a mechanism to protect our communities while still safeguarding our fundamental rights. Thank you, and I urge your support of Assembly Bill 117.
Thank you so much. And with that, I will go ahead and close the hearing on AB 117. Our next hearing is Assembly Bill 446. This is sponsored by Assemblywoman Leslie Cohen, and it revises provisions governing guardianship of minors. So with that, we'll give the Assemblywoman a few moments to approach the table and get settled. And also co-presenting is Jonathan Norman from Legal Aid, co-presenting? Okay, well, additional presenters will introduce themselves when they begin. Again, the hearing is officially open, so whenever you all are settled and ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair Leslie Cohen, Assembly District 29. We're working off the amendment. It's very long, so I didn't print it out for everyone, but it is on Nellis. As you heard, this bill does have to do with minor guardianships, which is a subject that Legal Aid and the coalition knows a lot about. So when I was approached to sponsor the bill, I knew that this would be a good bill that would help our kids who do have guardianships with people caring for them who aren't necessarily their parents. So with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan and the coalition to walk you through the bill.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, and thank you, Chair Miller, members of the Judiciary Committee, Jonathan Norman, Jonathan Norman, with the Nevada Coalition of Legal Service Providers. Relevant to this bill that includes Northern Nevada Legal Aid and Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. Since we started our minor guardianship programs, we've represented more than 3,000 children in over 1,600 minor guardianship cases. Our representation spans from representing children in initial petitions for guardianship through trials over whether a guardianship should be granted, to hearings on petitions for visitation and terminations of guardianship. Most people, especially on this committee, should be familiar with guardianship because we just talked about that last Friday. The structure that allows an adult And so in minor guardianship, it's the structure that allows an adult who's not the parent to care for a child when a parent is unable to do so. So it does differ from adult guardianship, and the needs of children obviously differs pretty dramatically from the needs of adults in guardianship. I would hazard a guess that most people in this room would know a grandparent, an aunt, a godmother who's caring for, or a grandfather, uncle, who's caring for children in their parents' absence. What people may not know is the vast majority of minor guardianship cases derive not from the death of a parent, but because a parent is struggling with issues like substance abuse, alcoholism, domestic violence, homelessness, or untreated mental illness. Guardianship may also derive from ongoing physical abuse in the home by a parent or another adult. In short, many guardianships are sought by relatives and family friends for the same reasons a child welfare agency may remove a child from the parent's care. And I'm going to turn it over in a moment to Ms. Marina Dahlia Hunt, who runs the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada's minor guardianship program. But the bill is so big, right? We're looking at a very big amendment. So I just want to highlight at a high level the things that this bill is addressing. And I want you to keep that in mind as we move through the presentation and we hear support and opposition. So the bill makes the guardianship process more collaborative between the guardians and the parents. It empowers parents by further strengthening parental preference and entitling parents to an evidentiary hearing if they object or seek to terminate the guardianship. and it's if they object to the formation of the guardianship. Maintain children's ties to their parents, even when they are unable to provide full-time care. There is currently no right to visitation between children and their parents in the minor guardianship statute. And as a caveat to that, it's always when appropriate, right? A guardianship like Department of Family Services cases, we're looking at having the kid be safe. So it's when that visitation is appropriate. Protect children whose guardian is unable to continue to serve and who remains without a suitable parent by requiring the court to refer that matter to the Department of Family Services in lieu of terminating the guardianship with no further oversight. Increase knowledge of process and path for reunification by requiring collaborative development of case plans so that guardians and the parents know the expectations at the onset of the case. Increase the court's knowledge about a proposed guardian by requiring a petitioner to provide additional information about their suitability in the initial petition. And again, that's information that's known to the petitioner. So we're not asking them to be an investigator, right? This is, if they know the members who are in the household, we want them to put that in the petition. Protect children in emergency circumstances by clarifying when a temporary guardianship over a minor may be granted before the hearing, and provide a path for reunification and the termination of the guardianship. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Dahlia Hunt.
Thank you. Good morning. Marina Dahlia Hunt, MARINA DALIA-HUNT. As Mr. Norman mentioned, I am the team lead for the Minor Guardianship Advocacy Program at Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. To kind of start off, I want to just give you a sense of the population that we actually see in minor guardianship in at least Clark County. Over the past month, we've had a maternal grandmother seeking guardianship over her 5 grandchildren after her daughter passed away. The children have different fathers, one of whom has a history of physical abuse against his child, another who is struggling with substance abuse. We have a paternal grandmother seeking guardianship over 2 of her grandchildren to keep them from returning to an abusive mother. Oldest child was diagnosed with autism, but grandma can't enroll him in school without a guardianship. We have a family friend seeking guardianship over a child who's coming from California after California Child Protective Services recommended guardianship in lieu of removing the child after they disclosed sexual abuse by a family member. And we have a step-parent seeking guardianship over her stepchild who is currently a patient at a residential treatment facility after dad passed away. Mom is homeless, living in her car, struggling with substance abuse, and is in an abusive relationship. Stepmom can't participate in the child's discharge plan without a guardianship. It's just a small sampling of cases. We get over 100 cases a month down in Clark County. And these cases are not easy. They're not easy for the children, the guardians, the parents, or the courts. And one of the unique things about minor guardianship, unlike children in the dependency system, is once a guardianship is granted, typically there are no review hearings, there's no social workers, there's no appointed counsel for the parents, there are no case plans, and as Mr. Norman mentioned, no clear visitation rights between children and their parents. And the petitioner and parents are often on their own to figure out this complicated process. Most proposed guardians are not represented by counsel, even fewer parents are. Once a guardianship is granted, the only ongoing requirement for a guardian in terms of their requirements to the court is to provide a short report of guardian to the court annually. There's no review process to determine if a parent has corrected the reason for need for guardianship or even to understand if they've stayed in contact with their child. Even in straightforward cases where both parents are permanently unavailable through death, illness, incarceration, deportation, the process is not easy. So as the system currently operates, all petitioners have to serve a litany of relatives, all parents, all grandparents, all siblings over the age of 14, and the Department of Health and Human Services through certified mail, return receipt requested, or personal service. Where this system gets even more complicated is when the relative's location is unknown. Then, under the statute as it currently operates, the only accepted method of service is through publication in the relative's last known locale. This is both impractical and costly. If the goal is to ensure a relative, including a parent, knows about the guardianship proceeding, publication in a newspaper is not the way to accomplish that goal. Publishing in the newspaper is also expensive. In Clark County, it costs approximately $150 to publish in the newspaper. This issue gave rise to our first goal in this legislation, to simplify service requirements in the statute, to allow for service through electronic means when a relative's locations are unknown, and to dispense with the requirement to serve the Department of Health and Human Services who aren't involved in the guardianship proceedings at all. The sections of the bill that address the service issues are sections 9, 15, 16, 19, and 20. So after the straightforward cases, we have the cases that are the bulk of focus of the proposed revisions to the statute. These are cases where parents recognize that they are currently unable to care for their child due to a confluence of circumstances, and they want a relative or a friend to get guardianship. They're in favor of this, and they understand it's in their child's best interest. This decision of a parent to decide that they're currently not able to care for their child and they need help is a decision that the Supreme Court of Nevada has consistently affirmed as something we want to encourage parents to do, to act when it's in their children's best interest. But here is where we see both a high amount of misinformation among the parties, including parents and guardians, but also an opportunity to shape a better system that takes this desired collaboration between the parents and guardians a few steps further. So here I'd like to highlight a few key ways that we'd like to update the statute to better meet the needs of this subset of families. So first, something that's important to contextualize this matter is a high proportion of these consent-based guardianships, though not all, have had some recent interaction with the child welfare system that has given rise to the guardianship, either directly or indirectly. So due to these interactions, parents and guardians are often under the impression that through a guardianship they will have some kind of case plan, they'll have a social worker who will help them reunify with their child. This is not the case. There is no in almost all guardianships, there's no ongoing interaction between the child welfare system and the guardian. But that does not mean that a child can safely return to their parent once the child welfare investigation is closed. The parent still has a lot of work to do. So this requires a better understanding at the beginning of a guardianship about the reasons a guardianship is being granted and what potentially will need to change for the guardianship to terminate. To address these issues, this bill does a couple of things. First, the bill requires parents and guardians, where appropriate, to collaborate on a care plan that sets forth the reasons for the need for guardianship, the circumstances under which it might terminate, the rights and responsibilities of both parties, including a proposed visitation schedule. Second, this bill revises and clarifies the parental preference doctrine to clarify that the decision to grant a guardianship is not an inquiry comparing a parent to a guardian, but a statement that first, a parent is presumed suitable to care for their child, and a guardianship should only be granted if a parent is found unsuitable. Third, this bill shifts the burden for termination of consent-based guardianships to require a guardian to prove a continued need for guardianship the first time a parent who consented to the guardianship seeks to terminate. And fourth, this bill strengthens the right to visitation as appropriate between a child and their parent. In a forthcoming amendment, I believe the amendment's been filed, we proposed additional language setting forth a clear preference for continued contact between parents and their children when a guardianship is in place where safe and appropriate. The provisions of the bill that address these issues are sections 12, 22, 24, 29, 32, 43, and 50. And then another goal of this legislation is to amplify the voices of children in minor guardianship proceedings. Currently, the court is only required to consider the opinion of a child if they are over the age of 14. As originally written, the bill proposes lowering the age of required consent to a guardianship to 12. After discussing this matter with stakeholders, we're working on an amendment on that issue, but we're still requiring the court to consider the preference of the children at any age, not just over 14. Second, this bill clarifies the preferences for appointment of counsel in certain circumstances, including when an evidentiary hearing is scheduled or when the matter is contested or when the minor is over the age of required consent. Third, this bill makes the minor a party to the proceedings. This previously only occurs if the minor is appointed an attorney. Fourth, this bill sets forth a clear preference for the appointment of an attorney for the minor in lieu of a guardian ad litem. And guardians ad litem serve an important role in some minor guardianship cases, especially estate cases. But in guardianships of the person, the direct representation model ensures that the child's voice is heard in the court. Fifth, this bill requires the guardian to inform the court if the child has been admitted to a long-term care facility. The sections that address these priorities are 6, 8, 13, 14, 17, 21, 24, 30, 42, 43, 44, and 46. I'm almost done. The next category of revisions relate to the court's consideration of the guardian's qualifications and their insights into a case. As the law currently operates, the guardian must disclose whether they've ever been convicted of a felony, even if that was 40 years ago, but does not require the guardian to disclose if they've ever been the subject of a substantiated CPS investigation, nor does it require the guardian to disclose who lives in their home. This bill would change that, which would help the courts better understand the suitability of a guardian and the potential safety of the child. In addition, this bill would add a new category to the report of guardian that would ask the guardian to share whether the parent stayed in contact with their child and how that visitation was going. The sections that address these priorities are sections 11, 24, and 32. Next category of revisions relates to safety issues. The current statute allows for temporary guardianships prior to a court hearing in two circumstances, medical emergency or other good cause. Good cause is not defined in the statute. The statute would functionally define good cause to ensure that children who are at immediate risk of physical, emotional, or financial harm have the protection of a temporary guardianship prior to a hearing for 10 days. Second, the statute does not currently express what should happen if a guardian dies or wants to withdraw, but the parent remains unsuitable. This bill provides a mechanism for the court to refer this matter to DFS under those very specific circumstances. The sections that address these priorities are sections 5, 6, 8, 19, 20, 44, and 46. And finally, additionally, this bill simplifies estate matters. So it's quite unusual for a child to have an estate, unlike in the adult system. They primarily derive from inheritance due to the death of a parent or both parents or another relative, and sometimes from a settlement agreement. The goal of these revisions is just basically to defer how courts consider children's estates to the adult statute because their system is working really well, but otherwise state that a child's estate can't be used absent extraordinary circumstances. There are some of the amendments that have been proposed contain significant changes to the guardianships of the estate, but the provisions that will remain in some form are sections 25, 28, 33, 36, 41, and 55. And then there's just a small additional categories that didn't fit into any other category, defining co-guardianships for members of different households. Currently, there's no standards for when a court may grant a co-guardianship, and they can cause a lot of problems. So just wanted to add some more direction about when they may be appropriate and when they may not be appropriate. And that section is section 7. And then in sections relating to vexatious litigants, we've tried to even out the standard to indicate that both a guardian or proposed guardian and a parent can be considered a vexatious litigant rather than just a parent. So these are sections 18, 44, 48, 54. And then a number of the provisions are simple cleanup provisions that remove language that's clearly just a relic of the minor guardianship system initially deriving from the adult system. These provisions are 31, 34, 35, 37, 38, 39, 49, 52, 53, and 68. And then there were a number of sections in the original bill that we did not intend to change. So in the amended version, the following sections are removed to basically maintain the original language as is currently written in the statute. Those sections are 1 through 4, 10, 23, 26, 27, 40, 45, 47, 51, and then 56 through 67. Those are all removed to maintain the original language in the statute. Thank you.
And if I may, Chair, just before we go into questions, I did want to make sure we didn't, I don't think, define guardianship of the person and guardianship of the estate. So guardianship of the person is when the guardian is going to take care of that child physically, make sure they have shelter, clothing, are getting to school and things like that. And then guardianship of the estate is just when there is some property, an inheritance, or a personal injury settlement that the guardian has to look after. And finally, I hate to use the word work in progress, but the reality is we do have stakeholders who are engaging on this topic, and so we're looking forward to feedback from, and we're incorporating feedback from them as we go. So thank you. And we're ready for questions.
Thank you. And I appreciate your willingness, and especially that representative of the bill sponsor, Assemblywoman Cohen, to always work and include all the stakeholders at the table. But I hate to use this term as well, committee deadline, House passage deadline. So we know what we're all up against, okay? Thank you. With that, I will open it up for any questions that committee members may have. Our first question is from Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a lot. And so I'm not going to pretend to you that I understood everything that I read. So I'm going to ask you, please, to help me understand what you mean when you speak specifically about in cooperation. What does that look like? And I'm really concerned because you listed, when you opened, these situations where children are in guardianship. And as a grandmother, if my grandbaby, Ella, was taken because there was an issue of her safety, I don't want to talk to her folks about, oh, can we have visitation, right? Just going to be honest, I'm a human being, right? I want to know what this is going to look like if mom says that now she wants to come back in this situation. How would that work?
Marina Dahlia Hunt for the record. So right now, as the statute operates, the visitation is entirely at the discretion of the guardian. And how we would like to change the process to be more collaborative, again, where only safe and appropriate. So there are certainly circumstances where visitation is never appropriate. And in our model, we follow a client-directed model where we ask children whether they'd like to visit with their parents, and sometimes the answer is no. And that's what we advocate for, and that's often what the court grants. So we're not talking about cases involving severe physical abuse where the child's really afraid of their parent. But in cases where a parent is struggling with substance abuse, for example, and when they're sober, they can competently take their child to McDonald's and maintain a relationship that evidence has shown is good for both the parent and for the child, to dating those familial ties. That's where we want the collaboration. In the amendment that we proposed, there's more specific language on how the court can consider the visitation and essentially presume it's in the best interest of the child to maintain some kind of contact, and that contact could be just phone calls or over the phone once a week. It doesn't have to be in person or overnights. But the goal for some of these cases is that they ultimately do reunify with their parent. These guardianships are not always meant to be permanent. So without some kind of contact, when a child lives with their grandmother for 5 years with zero contact with their parent, and then mom has resolved the reasons for the need for guardianship, that child's not going to be ready to reunify because they've had no contact. So our goal in having more collaboration is to actually make it a process where the child can safely return to the home, and sometimes that might not be appropriate as well.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So I understand your intent, but I'm more interested in the process. How would this mom or dad go through this? Where does this process of reunification, are they going to come knocking on my door? Because that would not be a good thing. So they need to go to someone, right, to talk to them about, I'm okay now. Where do we start? What is the process? Is that laid out? Or is that going to be a departmental procedural thing?
Marina Dahlia Hunt for the record. So the process at the inception will be a specific care plan in a form approved by the Supreme Court of Nevada. This specific revision derived from another state, Vermont, that implemented this model to increase the cooperation between parents where it's possible. So the ideal would be that the parent and the proposed guardian would sit down at the inception while the parent is consenting to the guardianship and go through the expectations for visitation. And it would include provisions that would specifically have benchmarks and could include provisions that say if you're not sober, you can't visit. And that would be filed with the court at the inception. If a parent seeks to modify the visitation agreement, they will have the responsibility to petition the court for visitation. That will be scheduled for hearing, where the court can consider arguments from both sides. The guardian can object, the child can object, and the court will make the ultimate decision.
Thank you. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Mosca.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this. And so trying to understand then, do we have the data of how many children do go back, or would this bill help us be able to track that?
Marina Dahlia Hunt for the record. No, we don't have data on how many guardianships are terminated. From kind of anecdotal data, it's few, but we don't have the specific number.
And if I may, Chair Leslie Cohen, Assembly District 29, it's, to be clear, while a lot of this is going on through our legal aid providers, a lot is also going on through our private practice law firms.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this issue. So my question is about public guardians. We got a letter from someone very concerned about the changes to public guardianship. And so could you just speak to just what it is as a definition and then what will change under this bill?
Thank you, Marina Dahlia Hunt, for the record. So the public guardian is, I don't know if I have the exact legal definition, but essentially they're a public servant who primarily serves as a guardian of the person and estate for adults. Under the statute, under the minor statute, they can serve as a temporary emergency guardian of the estate for a minor. The changes to the public guardian provisions were more sweeping than I think we intended. So in our amended version, we're actually removing, I believe, all revisions to anything to do with the public guardian.
And if I can just follow up, I think, is it the letter from Douglas County? And I had read that, and we need to reach out to get clarification, because when I read that, I was under the impression that it was guardianship of the person. And so I know in our conversations with the public guardian in Clark County, we just need to clarify if that is happening and if that should be appropriate. So we read the letter. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for the bill presentation and for bringing this before us. I have a constituent who is the legal mother of children, and yet because they have an estate, has to get a guardianship of them in order to just manage that estate, which she's not even actually allowed to do. That is, touch it in any way. Would you go into a little bit more depth in these changes on the guardianship of an estate for a minor and how that's going to be changing?
Sure, thank you. Marina Dahlia Hunt, for the record. So in the amended version of this bill, we're making very few changes to the guardianship of the estate, primarily to clarify that the money does need to go into a blocked account. I know it's cumbersome when a parent has to seek guardianship over their child's estate just to put it in a blocked account. We are first expanding I don't know if expanding is the right word, but clarifying when a parent can invest the money, so it's not just sitting there essentially losing money with interest. Right now, the statute only allows for investment, I believe, in like mutual funds and bonds, very specific, and it's expanding that a little bit. And then it's just clarifying when a guardian may seek to remove money from a blocked account. So while we do have parents who are just trying to put money into a blocked account, we do also have some parents and guardians who take a child's estate as a free pass to spend and go to Disneyland and go to casinos and spend the child's estate. And that's come from normally a parent passing away, and that's their legacy for their child. So we're just adding more protections for the blocked account for those larger estates, where some guardians have expended them without the child's consent.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any additional questions, I will go ahead and open it up for testimony in support of Assembly Bill 446. We'll start here in Carson City first. Not seeing anyone approach. Broadcasting, will you open the lines, please?
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 446, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 988, you are unmuted and may begin.
Hello, Ali Caliendo, for the record, ALICALIENDO. I'm the founder and executive director of Foster Kinship, And as such, we operate Nevada's statewide Kinship Navigator program, and we commonly work with families who find that guardianship is the best option for their family. We are very grateful to the children's attorneys from Legal Aid's Guardianship Attorney Project, who are making a critical difference representing children in guardianship cases, and these proposed changes address current weaknesses in our guardianship law that currently negatively impact children, parents, and guardians. The majority of kinship families file for guardianship on their own, and as such are often delayed in receiving legal capacity due to complications around proper service. Allowing electronic service will make it both easier to provide proper notice and will reduce burdensome costs on caregivers. It is important to note that proposed guardians, that they need to show that they are able to properly care for children, and by requiring the proposed guardian to provide appropriate information regarding their capacity to provide safe care, children will be in situations better suited to short and long-term positive outcomes. AB 446 will increase family decision-making outside the child welfare system, ensuring that guardianship is a safe alternative to foster care while still considering the rights of children and parents. It's important to note that if the child is placed with a relative in foster care, there is support from the child welfare system around co-parenting, visitation, and reunification. However, current law does not require that guardian-parent collaboration under guardianship, leaving kinship families and parents to navigate a pathway to reunification on their own, which is often difficult. We know that when safe, kids do better with their parents, but the way the law is currently written, guardianship doesn't include that path towards reunification unless the child welfare system is involved, and we don't believe that that's equitable for children, parents, or caregivers. AB 446 will help proposed guardians understand and prepare for the responsibility of guardianship, and when safe and possible, encourage parents and the proposed guardian to work together on behalf of the best interest of the child. Finally, at foster kinship, we have seen situations where the guardian is no longer able or willing to serve, and parents have not sought to terminate guardianship, leaving the child in a legal gray area that is often unsafe. Requiring referral to the child welfare system in those cases closes a very important gap in the guardianship safety net. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Broadcasting next caller.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is Holly Wellborn, Executive Director of the Children's Advocacy Alliance. Ms. Caliendo has hit most of the points. I even have in my testimony the legal gray area that we place children in when when a guardian seeks to terminate that guardianship and there aren't options for where that child can go. So I do just want to say ditto to her comments and just stress that collaboration between the parent and the guardian is crucial and is in the best interest of the child. And there are safeguards in place, and I believe that there are safeguards in place in this bill to ensure that we're acting in the best interest of children. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller.
If you have recently joined and would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 446, please press star 9 now. There are no other callers choosing to testify in support at this time.
Thank you, Broadcasting. Then with that, I will open it up for testimony in opposition. Anyone here in Carson City, please?
Good morning, Chair Miller and members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. My name is Jeff Rogan, R-O-G-A-N, and I'm here on behalf of Clark County with some limited opposition to AB 446 on behalf of our Office of Public Guardian as well as our Child Welfare Agency, with the understanding that there is an amendment that may address some of these issues that I raised today. However, as written, we have these concerns. First, with regard to Section 60 of the bill, we'd like some clarity regarding whether a court may appoint the public guardian to be a guardian of a minor, either of the guardian of the person or of the estate. Our public guardians' offices are presently not equipped to care for a minor child or act as a guardian of their person. And if the intent of the bill is to only allow a court to appoint the public guardian as guardian of an estate of a minor, then the bill needs to be amended to specifically say so. Moreover, several of the new provisions created in this bill are burdensome for a public guardian's office. These include the requirement in Section 25 that a guardian established a blocked account for minors, and in Section 26, the requirement that the public guardian make and file a verified acknowledgement before accepting appointment as a guardian. And we'll work with the bill sponsor as well as proponents to address those issues. Lastly, Clark County's Child Welfare Agency opposes Section 24 as written. By requiring a minor aged 14 years or older to consent to the appointment of a guardian, Section 24 creates a void if the child does not consent to the proposed guardian and there is no other potential guardian. This will make our child welfare agency the safety net, and foster care is not an appropriate option for teenagers when there is a fit and willing relative or fictive kin. We look forward to continuing to work with legal aid and the bill sponsor to address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of this committee. My name is Egan Walker, E-G-A-N, W-A-L-K-E-R. I am a district judge in Washoe County and co-chair of the Statewide Guardianship Commission. I speak today in opposition to AB 446 for the following reasons. First, the thoughtful questions and comments of this body last Friday in reference to the adult guardianship issues apply equally here. Moreover, our concern, by our I mean Judge Marquis and myself as co-chairs of the Guardianship Commission, is this is a giant bill with now giant amendments, none of which have been discussed with Guardianship Commission or the co-chairs. 0 of them have been discussed outside of brief meetings with the lobbyists last week or even this morning. None of this has been vetted with any of the commission members. Moreover, you have heard no comments whatsoever about the effects this will have on our rural colleagues. I've had the privilege, as part of a very large project we're undertaking as a part of a grant that was obtained by Justice Hardesty to improve guardianships in Nevada, to go to every court in Nevada and speak with every judge that handles guardianships in Nevada. And none of the comments offered by way of legal advocacy for children address in any way the concerns that will be created for unfunded mandates in the rural courts. If you're Mike Montero in Humboldt County, his signature is on every order in every case of any kind in the entire county. And no one has talked to Mike about how appointment of counsel in Humboldt County would be affected by these changes. No one has talked to any of the other rural judges that I'm aware of about any of these proposed changes. Let me emphasize one point. There are many good things about this bill, and I double down on the comments I made about my legal aid comments last week. They do magical work. I'm very strongly in support of legal aid and the advocacy that occurs. In fact, I'll be speaking at Northern Nevada Legal Aid's annual fundraiser in just a few weeks as one of the speakers in support of their fundraising. But I ask you to consider this. If the prototypical guardianship you've been asked to consider is mom and dad are unavailable for some reason, and grandma is seeking guardianship, and a 14-year-old girl says, I don't want grandma as my guardian because grandma doesn't agree that my 25-year-old boyfriend shouldn't have contact with me. That 14-year-old now has a veto that makes her unsafe. She doesn't fit under mom or dad's care, custody, and control because it's not safe. She won't accept grandma as a guardian. She moves into the foster care system, and what happens is her 25-year-old boyfriend, who also, by the way, is her sex trafficker, picks her up at the door of Kids Cottage in Washoe County. And we've now pushed her into a very dangerous situation with unintended consequences. So I urge you to consider, Judge Marquis and I warrant to all of you, we will work with the stakeholders through the commission this session and in the next 2 years of the next session to improve the minor guardianship bill. I told you last week, blame any errors in the minor guardianship bill on me. I was one of the co-authors of it. But these changes that are proposed need to be thoughtful, nuanced, and well vetted across all of the stakeholders and not just represent the voice of the children involved. And that's what's happening with this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next caller. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there anyone else here in opposition? Okay, broadcasting. Is there anyone on the line for opposition?
Caller with the last 3 digits 273, please press *6 to unmute your phone.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Rachel Tigert, and I'm an attorney practicing in the area of both adult and minor guardianship in Clark County. Those of us who actively practice in the guardianship community and are stakeholders in this area of law were only made aware of this bill, which is over 100 pages long, yesterday, and have not had sufficient time to thoroughly review the proposed amendments. As has been mentioned before, this bill was also not presented to the Guardianship Commission. We're asking that we object to the bill, and we're asking that it not be passed without being presented to those of us who do work in this area of law, so that we can all work together to make proper amendments at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next caller?
Caller with the last three digits 200, you are unmuted and may begin. Caller with the last three digits 200. Your phone may be muted on your end, but it's not on ours.
My apologies, Madam Chair. This is Buffy Okuma, last name spelled O-K-U-M-A, from the Washoe County District Attorney's Office. First, want to apologize to Assemblywoman Cohen for not reaching out to her sooner. But as you've heard from others, we were reviewing the bill, and it was so voluminous that the further we analyzed it, we saw greater and greater impact on the child welfare system. I do just want to indicate that we would also like to work on any amendments, but also share the concerns about all of the stakeholders not being included in something that will have such an effect on not only the minor guardianship system, but also the child welfare system as a whole. Primarily, our concerns are that it makes minor guardianships extremely complicated for many of the people who are trying to navigate the system to try and care for their family members without governmental involvement, but that will be just simply unable to navigate the system without that. And as a result, we think it's going to push more children into the child welfare system. We also are concerned about the provisions that push the burden of proof if somebody seeks to terminate a guardianship onto the guardians, who again are already challenged with navigating the system. But as with others, we would like the opportunity to work with Assemblywoman Cohen and the other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Broadcasting, next caller.
There are no other callers choosing to testify in opposition at this time.
Okay, thank you. Then I will open it up for neutral testimony here in Carson City. If there's anyone that would like to testify in neutral, please approach. Not seeing anyone. Broadcasting, is there anyone on the line for neutral?
To testify in neutral to Assembly Bill 446, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. There are no callers choosing to testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you for that. Then I will welcome Assemblywoman Cohen and Mr. Norman back for any final remarks.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Jonathan Norman, Nevada Coalition of Legal Service Providers. Working with stakeholders, I had conversations with Judge Markey about anticipated changes to this going back to June and July. Now, there can be some criticism there, whether it was specific language, but language and what we're doing always comes with LCB, and we're working on drafts as we go. So I'll take some criticism there for that. The BDR was filed in December, and we got language, specific language at the same time that other stakeholders would have gotten it. I would add, we're open to, if there's something in the process that we're proposing that is troublesome, we're willing to work with stakeholders. I heard today issues with 3 policy points. One is the consent of the minors. I would add that, you know, coming from working in child welfare, kids will vote with their feet if you force them. At the same time, we're sensitive to the concerns of those stakeholders. DA Duffy reached out to me. We've been talking about that consent issue now for a week. She was texting me this morning at 6 a.m. as we were dialing in a potential amendment. And I think we're there on language that would alleviate the concerns of the DAs on the point of consent. That also gives our kids in this system the ability to look at a statute and say, I am heard in this statute. And I think that's important because, you know, at the end of the day, that example, which is a great, compelling example, that child's going to vote with their feet if you force it and don't consider where they're coming from. And so, you know, if there are policy, the other policy thing is the burden of proof shifting in the consent cases. And I think we're open to discussing that. And then Mr. Rogan with Clark County, I think those issues with the public guardian were well on our way to solving. So as far as the policy arguments I heard in opposition were, you know, we're dealing with the consent issue, we're dealing with the issues for the public guardian, and that leaves this burden of proof issue. And the idea that this is making guardianship more complicated, I think read the changes and what they do and decide for yourselves if that is making it more complicated, because this is simplifying a statute that was, you know, the first step was splitting this off from adult guardianship, which was done in 2017, and now the next evolution is to tailor this to the needs of families and kids. So I would ask that when you hear this is making it more complicated and unintended consequences, read the changes, and I'll be stopping by your offices to have conversations about what those changes are, and judge that for yourselves. And then know that you know, my cell phone is on all my business cards, much to my detriment. So any stakeholder can reach out to me at any time, and I'm willing to talk to them. So I want to thank you for your time and consideration.
Leslie Cohen, Assembly District 29. I want to thank the committee for hearing the bill and thank Ms. Dahlia Hunt and Mr. Norman for their work on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I will go ahead and close the hearing for Assembly Bill 446. Our last order of business today is public comment. So again, everyone will have up to 2 minutes to make a public comment on something that's not pertaining to the 2 bill hearings that we had today, but anything else that's under the purview of this committee. So is there anyone here in Carson City that would like to make public comment? Not seeing any. Is broadcasting, is there anyone on the line?
To provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIEGRANT. My brother Thomas Purdy was murdered by Reno Police and Washoe County Sheriff's Office during a mental health crisis in 2015. AB 58 passed in 2021 legislative session authorizing the Attorney General to investigate whether a state governmental authority, any agent thereof, or any person acting on behalf of a state governmental authority has engaged in certain patterns or practices that deprive persons of certain rights, privileges, or immunities. Myself and several other families in Washoe County who have had a loved one murdered in Washoe County by police have called on Attorney General Aaron Ford to open investigations into the pattern and practice of community members being tried, convicted, and executed by law enforcement in Washoe County. My brother was one of 3 men asphyxiated at the jail. Washoe County District Attorney Chris Hicks did not do an investigation into any of those murders because you can't justify murdering unarmed men surrounded by multiple deputies inside of a facility. I'm urging you as elected officials to all support my family and the other 2 men who were asphyxiated at that jail and call on Attorney General Aaron Ford to open an investigation into the Washoe County Jail. As you know, I have called and read comments from people who are currently incarcerated there. It's care and custody, not kill in custody. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. Next caller.
There are no other callers choosing to provide public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I will end public comment. Thank you, members, for your engagement today, and to the public. And with that, I will go ahead and close. We'll adjourn today's meeting, and I will see everyone back at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. This meeting is adjourned.